All right, we should be live here. Just making sure everybody hear me okay. Well, I'm going to assume we're good. All right, thank you, S90. I appreciate that. All right, cool. I think we're good to go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Picking Bones. My name is Eric Jones. Sorry it's been a little while. I know it's been a few weeks. Things have just been pretty busy for me. I started a new job. I worked 6 days in a row. Just been doing a lot of hours, and a lot of what I wanted, the videos that I've been working on are all like in-depth book reviews or like pretty extensive videos. A lot of the stuff I do here it just takes a lot of work, and if I'm working a ton of hours at my other job, it's just tough. So that's where I've been. I apologize, and I'm starting to get more used to the schedule there though, and settling in more. So I should be able to crank out more content regularly. And let's get right to it though. Today we're going to be looking at not the Secret Destiny of America. This is actually two books. We're going to be going after America's Assignment with Destiny, which is another Manly P. Hall book where he kind of talks about America and the occult influence on our society and some of the long-term plans that these occultists have had for our nation. And so we're going to dig into this book. We're going to be doing half of a book today because that's how we're going to do it. And I think it's probably silly for me to have been pushing myself to do full book reviews. I've read another book and a half of a series that I'm trying to do where we'll go through all three of those books. I'm just giving myself a lot with some of these videos, and I'm just going to try to break it up more so I can post more regularly. And so yeah, let's get right into it though. So this first half of the book is largely focused on South America and North America, the native tribes, and looking at what they believed. And it's coming obviously from the Freemasonic perspective, so they're really going to be Manly P. Hall is really pushing this Masonic view of the world, which is essentially that all the religions are one and people misunderstand what's going on, and these secret societies are the keepers of the true wisdom. They really know what's going on and understand how things are connected. And so let's start here in the foreword where he mentions the silent ones of earth. And this is one of the many names given to these various secret societies. He says that the vision of man's noble destiny and the sacred sciences which made it possible, the realization of that vision, have been guarded and served by the silent ones of the earth. The priesthoods of the sacerdotal colleges and the hierophants of the mystery schools and the adept masters of the secret societies have been the guardians of man's noblest purpose, the perfection of his own kind. And that is very much what Masonry is about. They like to say that Masonry is about making good men better, is kind of how they like to say it. But it is actually about this, specifically this idea of ascension of man, turning man into his greatest self so that he can become something better than man, so that he can become a god, essentially, is the goal of Masonry. It is acceptance of the Luciferian lie in the garden that we can be as gods. And so this perfection of his kind that they're talking about, a lot of what, you might read what Masons are saying, and they're like, oh, it sounds like they're talking about being benevolent to society. But they're saying that they are the ones who know everything, that they should have all the power to govern society as they will, because they are the brilliant, perfected ones. They know what's best for everyone. So they might sound benevolent, and they might even believe in their own benevolence, but it's a truly deranged belief to think that you should be the one in charge, like these people believe. It is that Luciferian idea of, I should be the one on the mountain. I should be God. I should be making the decisions. And that's what these people believe about themselves. It says democratic institutions must accept the task for which they were fashioned and become conscious custodians of the democratic destiny. He speaks in this book and the previous one that we looked at, The Secret Destiny of America. He speaks of how these democratic institutions are all part of this grand plan from these secret societies. That they're not, that there's more to these democratic institutions than meets the eye. He says, the plan that passes to the keeping of other groups and other ages, man cannot destroy or pervert the works of destiny. He can only divide himself from these works. He says, although empires may collapse, great teachers be martyred, schools and systems perish, the enlightened leaders remain unhonored. He says, the eternal commonwealth is an assignment of destiny and spiritual progress, symbolized by the fabled phoenix, which rises victoriously from the ashes of the human ruin. So, he says that we're not yet giving honor to all of these custodians of this grand plan, but one day we will. So, now he starts to jump into Quetzalcoatl. This book is not divided up in the same way as the last. And this one does, it seems a bit more in-depth than The Secret Destiny of America. The Secret Destiny of America was a super easy read. This one goes into a little more detail. He actually sources stuff a lot better than most Masonic works I've seen. He actually, mentions the real documents and the people that were working on these things, which is quite nice for a Masonic work, because often they just tell you things and you're just supposed to believe them with no sort of sources for you to check yourself. And I would like to go through a lot of this in more depth, comparing different sources, looking at how he says some of these legends went down versus the actual writings that we have. But it is difficult because so much of the native tribes records and it's all been destroyed. So many people were wiped out, and tomes were just ruined. And so it can be a real trouble to try to sort through the legitimate histories of the Americas, and I think that's partly purposeful. He talks about that in this book. But we're going to dig now into South America first. So we'll look at Quetzalcoatl and the similar legends. From the legendary histories of these persons, they should be included as adepts or initiates of ancient secret schools, possibly Atlantean. So he starts off basically suggesting that these South and Central American tribes were potentially the descendants of the Atlanteans or others' mystery schools. In a book written in the Quichean language and attributed to Votan, the Great One declared himself as a snake. He came to America by the command of God from a distant place, and he ultimately founded Palenque. He built a temple, which was called the House of Darkness. Here he deposited the records of his nation in keeping with certain aged men called guardians. There is a legend that this Votan was the grandson of Noah. There's a lot of biblical kind of reference that's going to come in here, or kind of alternate biblical history. And we'll talk about that more, why, in a little bit. Itzamana was another one of these priests who he was the son of the supreme deity, supposedly, Hanub-Ku, and he was shown rising from the mouth of the serpent or the turtle to symbolize that he came from the sea. One of the best emblems that he was known for was the Tau or T cross. It is now generally admitted that Quetzalcoatl of the Nahuatl people, and he basically names a number of different gods: Gukamats, Kalukustan, Kulkukan. I'm sorry, this is rough. I'm not good with these names, but in each language, the word signifies feathered, plumed, winged serpent. So he's basically saying that all these different tribes were all worshiping the same god with different names. And this is something that generally Masons do say, a lot of stuff like this, but I do think there is some truth to this. And if we're coming at this from the biblical perspective, which I do, if you believe in the Great Flood, well, God after the flood, the people gather and they eventually start to build the Tower of Babel, and then God separates the people and he separates the language. So it would make sense. So if that's true, then you have to consider that all these different tribes around the world would have some element of the true history of what happened, and they would be telling this same story of Babel and the flood in different ways as their legends transformed. But there's also the potential of they had the truth of what happened, but they might have also carried on with old occult traditions from that time. And so the idea that there were these these mystery schools, I believe that what the mystery schools are is the separated peoples around the world. These are the people that basically continued the occult traditions from pre-Tower of Babel. That's basically what I would argue is going on with all of these secret societies. And so there are actually connections between this stuff. There is actually something, I believe, to the Masonic idea that these different religions are often connected. But they're pushing it in a different way. They're not coming at this from the biblical perspective. But there is something to all of this stuff being connected. So anyway, it says here that Quetzalcoatl came from the fabled land of 7 colors. And if you study Theosophy or the New Age movement, you'll see they'll often reference this idea of 7 rays or 7 colors. So this is just Theosophy wiki. It's a common idea. H.P. Blavatsky talks about it. All these different prominent theosophists will talk about this stuff. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting about David, when I realized how full of shit David Icke was seeing that David Icke is actually pushing a lot of this same stuff. He talks about this idea of 7 rays, and David Icke incorporates a lot of truth when he talks about some of these secret societies. He talks about these big pedophile cabals, and he talks about some important stuff that not enough people are talking about, but then he mixes in obviously his reptilian stuff, which is nonsense, but he's also mixing in Theosophy. He's essentially pushing the Masonic religion on people while condemning secret societies, and that's generally true of a lot of these folks who are wolves in sheep's clothing. So let's continue on with the book. And it says here, among the appellations of this priest, prophet, king are he who was born of the Virgin, Lord of the winds, and the divine incarnation. Quetzalcoatl was the son of the universal creator God and the Virgin Xochiquetzal. So, you know, if you look at old documentary that was pretty popular for a while, Zeitgeist, they pushed the idea that Horus was born of a virgin, and so you'll see a lot of times people trying to make some of these figures seem very Christ-like, and a lot of it is BS. Now, I haven't done an in-depth study of all the claims that he makes in this book, but as I was saying, I'd really like to do some of that, doing some real comparison of these different documents that he brings up and looking at what's actually in them versus what he's trying to push with his work. But so I don't know if there's any truth to this at all, whether Quetzalcoatl was ever referred to as being the son of a virgin or anything like that. I would doubt it. I know it's not true of Horus. I know that that's a totally bogus claim that's pretty easy to debunk. But this just reminds me of that sort of thing. It says, in Indian monarchies, Torquedema described a band of people who came from the north dressed in long black robes. These wanderers were great artists and skilled in working metals. Quetzalcoatl was their leader. Mendieta, in his ecclesiastical history, described Quetzalcoatl as a white man. Said that he had the design of red crosses and held in his hand a sickle. So again, he's saying that there's a cross link. He says that a number of times in this book, that some of these Native American gods did have the cross as their symbol. Doubt that, I would say. But again, unsure. Need to look into some of that stuff more, see exactly what he's getting into. But he says Quetzalcoatl was identified with the planet Venus, just like Lucifer is. The Codex Vaticanus A says that the hero founded 4 temples, which sounds very much like the, we learned when we were looking at Harry Potter and Rosicrucianism. In one of the great Rosicrucian documents, there's this idea of these 4 schools, and you see that in Harry Potter, these 4 different branches of the school that you can go into, and it says here, talking about these 4 temples. It's clearly the same idea. It says, he destroyed himself by fire. His ashes changed into birds, and his heart became the morning star. He remained 4 days in the underworld and 4 days as a corpse. After that, he ascended to heaven as a god. It is specifically mentioned by Sahagún that Quetzalcoatl created and built houses under the earth. So now we get into the subterranean, this idea, if you look at like the Nazis, like there was a lot of the talk, they're talking about this secret race of people that lived under the crust of the earth. So it's interesting. It says the old priesthood, which practiced human sacrifice and adhered to a policy of war and destruction, resented the peaceful and gentle faith brought by Quetzalcoatl. So he makes Quetzalcoatl into a Christ-like figure that's very wonderful. He ended human sacrifice. He taught people to new technologies and wonderful things, and Quetzalcoatl is just the hero of the story in Manly P. Hall's telling of all this. He says, "Then the old and weary man called to the sea, and out of the waters came a raft of serpents. He stepped upon this strange craft and was carried away into the land of the sun's beginning. He left behind him a priesthood that perpetuated with esoteric rites the mysteries of the feathered serpent." So the idea is that Quetzalcoatl came, he brought all this knowledge. It's very Luciferian, this idea of bringing down knowledge to it's the idea of the sacred flame, like this knowledge was given to the people in a totally benevolent way, and this established these secret societies in America, and these secret societies have, since learning from this figure and similar figures around the world, they are perpetuating the glorious teachings of these ascended master type figures. It's essentially what is being told. Obviously, I would argue that these beings that were interacting with societies all over the world were demons. They were manipulating societies all over the world. And that's another way that there could be a legitimate claim to all these different groups being connected, like Masons would say. Well, if they're all communicating with demons, then ultimately, yes, they are all under the same leadership. And it might look a little bit different here and there, but if they're all communicating with the same demons, which are selling the same sorts of lies, it is all the same thing. Augustin Le Plongeon was one of the few Americanists to be accepted into the confidence of the ever-reticent Indians. They told him enough to convince a thoughtful man of the existence of the esoteric schools in the Mayan era. "The sacred mysteries," writes Le Plongeon, "have existed in America from times immemorial. There can be no doubt." So it goes on to keep arguing for pages about how, these secret societies have existed in America for a very long time, and they teach very similar things to Masonry and the other mystery schools. All accounts imply that the religious order which served the mysteries of Quetzalcoatl was long established. It says, "Children were consecrated to his temples from their birth and were marked by a special collar. At the end of the second year, the child was scarified in the breast. When it was 7 years old, it entered a seminary where it took vows covering personal conduct and public duties." And this priesthood, it talks about how they met in secret, in deep in the wilderness, in the jungle. They would go out, and if you were not one of them, you probably wouldn't be returning from the jungle if you showed up trying to figure out what they were up to. In skillful trades and metalworking, this Amerindian savior reminds one of the craftsmen of Tyre, who cast the ornaments for Solomon's temple as a benefactor of his people, as a liberator of men's minds and hearts. This Nahulatan demigod certainly revealed the attributes of the master builder. So he's comparing this legend to that of Hiram Abiff, the supposed one of the supposed founders of Masonry, according to Masonic legend, who was murdered and refused to reveal the secrets of Masonry, but then kind of becomes reborn, because Hiram Abiff is essentially a type of the Antichrist, as is Quetzalcoatl. It's this idea of, it's a replacement Christ, and it even has this idea of death and rebirth, which we see that the dying God is always worshipped by the Masons. It's it's a bastardization of Christ, and we see, in Revelation, where it talks about the mark of the beast. It tells us about how the beast will be wounded but will be restored. You have this idea right even in there, where it's, I believe this is all referring to the same thing. It's the dying God, which is the Antichrist. But they would try to say that Christ is just another version of this dying God. He's not. Christ is unique, and he is the true Savior. He is not like these other Antichrist figures. The state mysteries, however, were seldom performed in the sanctuaries of popular worship. Throughout the jungles are the ruins of extraordinary buildings constructed for unknown purposes. If the mystery system existed in the Western Hemisphere, as the landmarks indicate, it must have produced its initiates and adepts. These, in turn, became the leaders and saviors of these peoples. So he suggests that these buildings, he says, such gateways existed in all old countries where the mystery religion originally flourished. So he says that these buildings were used as gateways to the other world. And we know, we're just looking at shamans and witch doctors and all these people who practiced various rites and rituals, sometimes using drugs, often using things like ayahuasca, peyote, these drugs as part of a ceremony to enter into the spirit world where they could commune with these beings. And that's what's going on here. It's all it's demonic. So the manuscript of the Popol Vuh was rediscovered in 1855. The first English translation has remained practically unknown to students of Central American archaeology, as it appeared in The Word, a magazine dedicated to theosophical subjects. So that's some of these translations are coming from theosophical sources of these old works, which is why I really need to do a more in-depth study of just like looking at all these documents and doing a comparison from what he's saying to what the documents say. But Priestley suggests that the god Quetzalcoatl was known in Peru under the name of Amaru. This is very interesting. I've heard this before, but I didn't know that it came from Manly P. Hall. He writes, from the latter name, Amaru, comes our word for America. Amaruca is literally translated land of the plumed serpent. All the red men who have remained true to the ancient religion are still under their sway. The red men. The color red is very interesting. You could just be talking about all Native Americans. Sometimes they're. I'm guessing that's what that's referring to. He just says that out of nowhere. This concept of the red man, and there is another red reference that we'll get to quite soon here, that's especially interesting. But I've noticed just with many of these secret societies, the color red is super important in their symbolism. We see red as the color linked with communism, which we know is descended from the Bavarian Illuminati itself. We see red in the Bible used to describe the dragon in Revelation. And we also see red used to describe Esau and the Edomites. I don't know if there's a connection between the Edomites and the mystery schools, but it's something I wonder about. That is my personal theory. I think there's something going on with the Edomite people and their connection to the occult. But I'm not sure, and it's just a theory. Anyway, the book of the azure green veil is no longer to be seen, in which it could clearly be perceived that it had come from the further shore of the sea, which the book has been called The Record of Our Existence in the Overshadowing World, and How We There Beheld Light and Life. He says, either the veil which divides the spiritual universe from the material world, or the veil and the temple of initiation, behind which are the 7 lords of the great heart. So that's another reference to these 7 rays. These are all talking about the same thing. It's these 7 principles or rays or entities that are supposed to guide people. It says the Popol Vuh consists of a mythology gradually mingling in its descent with the beginnings of history. The early part deals almost entirely with superhuman beings, and the latter part with heroic deeds from authentic personages. According to this legend, the creator, the lord and maker, and Gukumats, the plumed serpent, so another name for Quetzalcoatl, they were surrounded. So you have these 2 beings, you have God and the serpent, according to this worldview, that were for creation. They were surrounded by just green and azure, and they were those who were engendered. Then the word came and spoke to them, and they joined their councils. Those who engendered then said, "Let it be done, let the waters retire and cease to obstruct." Thus the Creator said, "Earth," and it immediately was formed. So it sounds in some ways similar to the Christian creation account, but it's not the same because it's more of a dualistic view, because you have the 2 entities there from the beginning, the serpent and the creator. The heroes of the Popol Vuh are subjected to several ordeals or tests of courage, fortitude, and skill. The 7th test took place in the House of the Bat, which was ruled over by Camozats. And I had come across that god when I was working on my Batman video, because I was trying to figure out, like, why is he Batman? Is there anything to that symbolism? I don't know if there's a connection between this god and Batman or not, but that's the only time I had kind of come across this deity before. Guthrie presents a number of important parallelisms to the mysteries of the Egyptians, Chaldeans, and Greeks, to these Native American tales. He goes so far as to hazard the speculation that the 12 princes of Xibalba were the rulers of the Atlantean Empire. So, yeah, according to the Atlantean myth, there were these 12 kings that all ruled together. It was supposed to be like a democratic sort of monarchy system where these different kings would come together as a council and rule together. And so he's saying that this legend of these 12 princes, it's the reference to the same thing. On several continents, the serpent was among the important symbols of the initiated priests. Obviously, the natives did not intend to imply that they believed in actual essence of winged snakes, like David Icke would argue. He would argue that all these references to serpents are actually just talking about the reptilian alien race, which has been influencing humanity. But no, it's not. It's not that. But I do think there are literal beings. They're just demons. But anyway, it says the serpent was a wisdom symbol, and when plumed, it meant that wisdom had been given wings and become spirit wisdom or illumination. And then there's a reference to Matthew 10:16 where it says, "Be ye wise as serpents." So even the Bible does link the serpent to wisdom. But these cultists, they worship wisdom. So the Illuminati, the enlightened ones, they worship their own knowledge and view themselves as better and more fit to rule and do as they will with society because of their great knowledge. Among advanced tribes, according to Dr. Frank Boas, an elaborate series of esoteric doctrines and practices exists, which are known to only a small portion of the tribe, while the mass of people are familiar only with the, part of the ritual with its exoteric features. So they're essentially suggesting that the same structure of all secret societies, where you have, most of the people not really understanding what they're a part of, not really understanding the true meaning behind all the symbols. He's saying that this same sort of secret society system exists all throughout America in these various native tribes. It would seem that on the whole, the import of the esoteric teachings decreases among the more northernly and northeasternly tribes of this continent. Now, I thought that was a really interesting point because, that's another thing we noticed. We've got less serpent worship with a lot of the northern tribes, especially in the northeast. So I just thought that was pretty interesting. So and you also have less of these esoteric teachings there amongst these people that do not worship the serpent. Good people, legit. and there's, not all the mass human sacrifice up in the Northeast as well. It's pretty clear here that these tribes that worship the serpent were not the good, especially flawed tribes, which had, after the flood, probably continued and created new occult traditions from pre-Babel, whereas maybe some of the northern tribes held on to the truth. It is interesting to look at all the flood legends, and I just find this stuff fascinating, looking at what happened with these native peoples and what happened with the flood. How did that look exactly? How did that affect the new legends and myths that would form? In all matters of emergency or great decision of the Indian sought. In all matters of emergency or great decision, the Indian sought solitude. He went alone to some hide place and would build a small campfire, planted about him a circle of prayer plumes, smoked the ceremonial pipe, and waited through long hours of the night for the voices. The voices instructed him in the herbs of healing, taught him songs and dances, and brought him news of what was transpiring in distant places. There are many stories about medicine priests learning to leave their bodies at will. Many of these grand old mystics were wise in the ways of spirits, and should be regarded as duly initiated members of the esoteric orders. The miraculous powers of the medicine priest extended over a wide variety of phenomena. He talks about some of the different supernatural acts that some of these medicine men would perform. And he says that they could receive the impressions of the star spirits, that they would contact these entities, where they learned many of their the things that they would do, and the magic that they would perform. You know, I had a thought recently when I was watching someone talk about Star Wars a little bit, and he said that he found it funny how people in the Star Wars universe, in the newer ages, kind of just forget the history of the Jedi. They forget the Force. They forget that the entire universe knew about this supernatural force that could be harnessed by people. And then only a generation or two after you have like all of these Jedi and people, everybody's just forgotten about the Force somehow. And he was saying that seems kind of ridiculous. I don't see how all these people would just forget about that. But that's such a brilliant commentary from George Lucas on how people treat the supernatural in our world. For all of history, people have known the supernatural is a real thing. They've known about people speaking to spirits, and they've seen miracles, and people speak about these things in history. Everyone in history has always believed in the supernatural. It's only in these most modern, few generations that it's so adamant that, no, they're all just primitive people. They are all just idiots who believed a bunch of nonsense. That is very similar to the way that the Jedi are treated in Star Wars. I don't know. I think it's so fascinating. Like, people always knew that the supernatural was a part of our world. But now people just reject that. So, without much thought. In the Southwest legends, human beings originated beneath the earth in a kind of paradisical land. So, yeah, back to this underworld concept. In the beginning, everyone was happy, but later, an evil deed brought upon them the wrath of the gods. In most accounts, this lovely shadowland was destroyed by a flood. The secrets of healing, prophecy, and magic came to the Indian from an order of beings called Manitos. This Algonquin word now applied to the concept of powerful governing spirits. The Manitos were not actually gods, but superhuman man-like creatures, possessing extraordinary attributes and frequently considered as giants. Yeah. So you have the this concept of the Nephilim, people dealing with these spirits can lead to Nephilim. It can lead to giants. It can lead to crazy supernatural stuff. And this is all, it's a crazy topic, but this is the world that everyone always believed in. It's in the Bible. Like, they had to clear the promised land of giants. Giants are all over world history. It's fascinating. When the medicine man journeyed to the spirit land, he might be invited to attend a council of Manitos when he came to the great lodge in the sky. In some areas, the thunderbird was closely associated with the religious mysteries or societies. The myths and legends of the thunderbird are similar to the European and Asiatic accounts of the fabled phoenix. Early drawings of the Great Seal of the United States indicate that the bird represented therein was a phoenix rather than an eagle. We knew this already, of course, from our previous book. But it's fascinating this does give it more context. If there's truth to that idea that America was actually named after the land of the plumed serpent, which it does seem possible to me. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I had heard that the Amerigo Vespucci thing was disputed, that might not actually be how America was named. I don't know where America got its name, but it certainly seems plausible. And so then we would have the Amaruca. I have a quarter. I don't have a quarter on me, but yeah, just think, just pick up your quarter. Pull up here. We got the dollar bill. Here, there we go. Like that. That eagle is Quetzalcoatl. That eagle is the phoenix. That eagle is Lucifer. It is the dying god. That's what it is. It's so we got the eye of Lucifer here, and then we got Lucifer himself right there. This is the most satanic crap. It's so infuriating. You're just trying to live your day-to-day life. If you know anything about this stuff, you can't stop thinking about it, because you're always gonna need to pull out $1 for something, and it's just like it's right there, reminding you, hey, your money, it's satanic. Your nation was founded by a bunch of Satanists. It's just right in your face all the time. He talks also about androgyny and how that exists in all of the all over the place. Androgyny is very important to the Masons. If you watched my video where we did the tour of the Masonic temple, you see that the very first thing you see when you walk into the temple is actually these two giant kind of sphinx-like figures that are androgynous, containing breasts and yet also male features. These holy persons, he's speaking of the medicine men and people, these holy persons seldom took part in war and frequently were distinguished by a costume combining elements of male and female attire. The androgynous human being, in whom there was spiritual union of male and female attributes, has been widely accepted as personifying a superior type of capable and greater understanding of the father wisdom and mother love potencies of divinity. Such symbolism existed in all the great esoteric orders of the past. Yep. Androgyny is a key thing for these guys. You can see it in Baphomet, the figure of Baphomet as well. The Midwin or Great Medicine Society of the Ojibways initiated both men and women into the secrets of the art of healing and control of the vital current coursing through the nerve centers of the human body. To persons acquainted with secret societies, a good comparison for the Midwin charts would be called what is called a trestle board of the Masonic order. He says that these middies or shamans had birch bark rolls, which depicted the arrangements of lodges and included many strange pictographs. So, very similar to these Masonic boards, which are laid out and used for Masonic rituals, which are just loaded with symbolism. In 1919, Arthur C. Parker was invited to a secret lodge of the Senecas to witness their ceremonies. Now we're going to get to the red thing again. Here he heard the legend of Red Hand, a culture hero who would hold conversations with the Great Mystery. So he was one of these people contacting these entities. From the Great Mystery, he learned to love all the creatures of the earth, and he spoke the language of the birds and animals. Red Hand was slain by a poisoned arrow because he would not reveal to his assassin the secret of his spiritual power. And Goes on to say, those acquainted with the ritual of the third degree of the Blue Lodge of Masonry will realize that this story must have originated amongst the ritual of the esoteric schools. He says this because this sounds just like the legend of Hiram Abiff. An assassin comes along, wants this secret knowledge that this Red Hand has. Red Hand refuses to give it to him, and so he dies. But then he's brought back to life by the animals. He ascends into a higher being because he has achieved Masonic mastery, essentially. And he then starts... this will be a good spot to end with it, actually. He ends this section, speaking of the native peoples, by saying, the mystery schools of antiquity were represented in the Americas by institutions identical in principle and in purpose with those of Asia and the Mediterranean countries. That's essentially the point. One of the main points that he's making throughout this is that all of these native tribes seem to be seem to have the Masonic rituals in their own form. They seem to have the same occult teachings in their own form. And so I would argue there's probably some BS trying to make things look more similar than they are. But I don't see any reason to say this is all untrue. Like, it fits with the biblical worldview that these people should have similar legends. They are talking to the same beings. They're talking to the same demons. This stuff is all connected. So in the rest of the book, he starts to get into Christopher Columbus next. And then he gets into Francis Bacon and other figures. So our next video will be the conclusion of this book. We'll finish that book, and then we'll go into Francis Bacon and look at his New Atlantis for the next part of the series. And so that's it for this video today. But I do want to say, guys, thank you so much. I've broke 1,000 subs now, and YouTube allowed me to become a YouTube partner. So the channel is monetized now. So that's awesome. And it's very kind of tenuous time with YouTube. There's a lot of rough stuff going on. People getting deplatformed. People getting kicked off. I believe Sam Tripoli just got his channel removed. I believe we've got Copa, or I believe it's called, which essentially is going to ruin a bunch of YouTube channels. It's a tough time to be a content creator, and YouTube, especially with the type of content that we make here. But the support that I've gotten has been great. People seem to really appreciate these videos, and I really do enjoy making them. And I wish I could have this as my full-time career, but I'm just not there yet. I don't know how hard it's going to be to get there, but I'm going to keep doing my best. I'm going to try to get on a regular schedule with content production now that I'm getting more settled into my new job. Hopefully we can get on a more regular schedule with this as well. So thank you everyone so much for your support and for watching, and we'll see y'all next time. Have a great day.